Thank you for joining President Prodi. You are considered, together with Jeffrey Sachs, one of the conceivers of the idea of an international forum which spur a reflection on how digital technology can positively affect governance and civic rights. However, since the first edition of the International Forum on Digital and Democracy 2 years ago, we have been facing a global democratic decline. Trust in democracy and election is fading away. In your view, can we protect democratic process? And how can citizens be convinced that the system works for them?
Sorry not to be very optimistic in answer to your question, but in my not short life, I have seen, let's say, a regression of democracy over the world. I do remember my meetings 20 years ago or 25 years ago with the Chinese presidents, in which we were discussing freely, and there was some respect of democracy, curiosity. Clearly, they didn't want to become democratic. It was our illusion that with the increase of wealth, of income, they could be so. But there was an active curiosity. Now there is a sense of superiority. Since the new rulers in the 10 years of President Xi, China changed the mood, the attitude, telling, look, we are gaining approval in the world. Democracy is going back. We deliver. You, democratic country, you don't deliver. And everybody will look at us. And if we analyze, to give an answer to your question, it's true, in the sense that from Philippines to Central Asia, to many African countries, we enjoyed the, let's say, the elections in Africa, the flow of it. And now the democratic, the leaders democratically elected, they don't want to go away after the end of their legal mandate. And they transform themselves from democratic leader to authoritarian leaders. And we have this movement everywhere in the world. And so I do hope, I don't say if I trust, I do hope that the revolution, that we have here in the media, so may oblige the democracy to have more linkage between rulers and people, can change the situation, but we make an enormous effort in our electoral system, because when more and more people abstain from election and feel deeply themselves out of the system, it's difficult to countervail the new wave that I mentioned before.
Okay, talking about trust, as you mentioned before, there is this global trustworthiness index developed by Ipsos that found out that the government officials and politicians are the two least trusted categories of people in the world. Or this lack of individual trust represents a challenge, of course, for democratic process. According to you, trust will be more at stake with public administration becoming always more digital, when public servant and red tape will be replaced by software and automated decision?
First of all, it is correct, your question on your side, that to put together public administration and politicians, because in the common opinion, they are power that dominate on you, and this has made a great split in our society. Generally, clearly you blame politicians because you vote for them. But the mistrust in the direction of bureaucracy is the same, absolutely the same. And I think that in this field, the new media, the new instruments can play a role, a positive role can play. But the problem is the control of bureaucracy. Because if the owners of the new instrument is bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is not under control, the system will be worse, and the citizens will consider themselves even more far away from the democratic process, and the mistrust will increase. And this danger is real. This danger is real because the politicians as a category are many times without instruments to have a dialogue with the public administration in the technical aspects on how they, let's say, dig to have data or put them together or in the coherence. It's my experience how difficult it is to have a dialogue with your top civil servants in what they tell you when you have to take a decision. And so in this moment, why there is the same feeling of the citizen vis-a-vis politician and public administration, but in the decision-making process, the politician is very, very, very often weak in front of the public servant. And especially when in a country you have a strict link among public servants, you may have a two layers system in which the first one, the politician, approves, and the second one decides or oblige you to take a specific decision that is determined by the specific power of the bureaucracy. And this is the problem. Clearly, what do about it? You must have exercise a process of education of politicians to not to become technician, but to understand the consequence of the policies and the instruments adopted. For example, myself, I was very weak in understanding that, clearly the problem is the problem of generation, but I always was obliged to ask to some different type of bureaucrat, or to try to take an evidence of what was told me. And this is why must I repeat, deliver a message to the politician to be very, first of all, selective. Second, to try to have always an evidence of what bureaucrats tell you, because the new media, the new instrument will be more in the hands of bureaucrats than in the hands of politicians.
In going digital, the public debates that shapes our politics are opening doors to different opinion, view, freedom of speech and expression, and most notably this happens on social media. However, in increasingly often, and of course during wartime, online platforms are used a little like weapon. And this to limit information flows. Many times internet and social networks are shut down. In your view, could we be done something to counteract this phenomenon?
You asked me whether it would be possible a total disarmament in the world. I don't think it's possible in the sense that these are weapons. These are weapons. Used to prepare power, influencing election, or to fight a war. Same type of instruments. And let us be honest, sometimes you have a way blaming a specific country to have manipulated election. This has always been done and is done by everybody. Of course, somebody has more instrument, more skills, but this is absolutely unavoidable. I repeat, unless you create an agreement to abolish weapons, and I was taken by simply the increase of sophistication of the instruments. When I read about the technical skill of influencing public opinion for election, I remember when I was a child, I was so enjoying the United States Information Service that in the parochial cinemas were explaining how the system, the American system, was, let's say, more open, more full of advantage, and this clearly has become more and more sophisticated, and is now really a normal instrument of political power. And so allow me to be pessimist.
Can international institutions like UN or European Union play a role fostering global digital democracy resilience?
They should play a role, but you must have power to play a role. So you asked me about UN and European Union. Let us distinguish, UN power decreased, and I don't physically see whether UN could organize a shared system to, as you asked me, to help some sort of digital democracy. If you mention European Union, there is some room to do that. And now we have already decisions that make this market more transparent, more under control of the consequence of it. And so my idea is clear that in a system that is heavily controlled by one country or mainly one political sources, the real instrument is to increase competition in the sense of having different sources, different alternatives, and the dimension of the European market is big enough to give a contribution to increase the pluralism of the system. That is a foundation for democracy, pluralism. While but we need some sort of more progress to that, because we need not only a political instrument that can be European Union, but a political instrument backed by an industrial structure that make possible to have a voice that makes an alternative to the increase of democracy in the digital field. And now we are very far away from that, So we, European Union can have more word on the, let's say, strategy of the existing digital oligopolist, let us call it this way. But if you don't have, let's say, your players in this field, it's difficult to exercise power. And if you take the word competitors, the first 20, let's say, digital players, that can be one European, and so it's not easy to dictate rules without having also your hand, your fist to implement your rules.